I'll tell you, if you guys eat like this every month, you can invite me back anytime you want to. I'm taking a doggy bag home from my husband because he loves ribs, and I know he's gonna. And I didn't cook him dinner tonight, so he's gonna love that. I thought maybe what I would do is start out and tell you a little bit about myself, because I know many of you, like Tim and Richard and some of the others, but I think it's good for you to just kind of get my background. I have been in business for over 20 years, just so that you know that. I moved to Minnesota about 15 years ago. Prior to that, I lived on the East Coast, we were talking about it, and I lived for a couple of years in Chicago, and I was in the direct marketing industry where I was an executive for many years, and I was an officer as well. Worked for Avon Products, I worked for Sears Roebuck and Company, Spiegel's, and then was transferred or was offered a job by Fingerhut about 15 years ago. And no, I did not know Petters, because everybody else
Nobody Connie.
When I was campaigning last year, they said, well, where did you, they'd look at my resume and they'd say, where did you work here locally? I said, Fingerhut. They said, whoa, you know. So I said, no, I didn't know Petters. But I was hired by Ted Deichel to take over one of his divisions, and I had about my last job there, I had about 65 people reporting to me. I did about $350 million worth of business, traveled all over the world. And, you know, I was asked the question, well, why in the heck did you ever get into this business, into politics? What happened was, I have two children. I have a son that's 24 now. My son was friends with Tim's son. They went to Boy Scouts together. And I have a daughter that's 19. And about 9 years ago, they were 15 and, 9, whatever. And I realized that I needed to be home with them, quite frankly. We were experiencing some things that we weren't happy with, and so my husband and I made a big decision, and that I quit my full-time corporate job, and I decided to run for the Wayzata School Board. And I think I won because my name is Doepke, because I don't think anybody really knew who I was. But Harold Doepke, who was a very good, became a friend of ours, was a longtime teacher in this community, and people thought that I was his daughter. Of course, when Harold and I started to get to know each other, and we would speak at events, he'd always introduce me as his wife. So,
which he would be prone to do.
Yeah. So that's how I got into public service, and I will tell you that when I ran for the school board, and my husband and my two kids were my campaign team, but I really thought, well, boy, I'm going to really, go in and teach them a lot. And interestingly enough, I always say this, that I learned more than they ever taught me about people and about public service, and I know you guys know all about that, being the largest service organization in the world, which you are. I looked it up in the internet today. You're at 1.3 billion people, 45,000 chapters throughout the world. So I can feel very comfortable telling you that I'm sure you all, in your independent, in your private lives, businesses, and so forth, have realized that service is much more rewarding than the money that you get. And that's what I found. And so I stayed on the Wayzata School Board for 8 years. When I retired from the school board, the governor appointed me to an education commission for the state, and so I was on the board of the Minnesota Humanities Center for 2 years. And then also during that time, I had a small marketing business for a while too, and joined the Twin West Chamber of Commerce. And I was the board contact for the chamber for many years, and so I am still a member, but the board, I was on their board of directors for 2 years, and then I did business education partnerships, because education is a passion of mine, not just public education, but all education and choices for families. So that kind of gives you a little bit of a background on what I do and how I got here. And when John Burns, who I like very much, supported John in the last election and worked to get him elected. But he called me a year ago over Memorial Day, and he said, I'm not going to run for re-election, and if you're thinking of running, now is the time. So I jumped in and ran and was elected in last November. You know, what I thought I would do is also to talk to you a little bit about what I get many questions, but it would be, there are 5 questions that I get asked the most. And so I'm going to talk to you a little bit about what those are, and then I'm going to tell you just briefly about what we can expect going forward in the next session. The first session people, or the first question people ask me, they say, "Oh, did you survive?" And yes, I did. But I will tell you that being a freshman in the legislature, and I'm not new to tough decisions. I'm not new to problems, and that was one of the reasons that I was elected, and that was one of the reasons I ran, because I knew that it was going to be tough, and I felt that I had something to give to the state and to this district. But the things that I thought were going to happen, other things happened. It was just the biggest surprise, and I think the things that surprised me the most is that people didn't really work together. And I wasn't used to that. Being in a corporate atmosphere, you have a guy at the top, and then you become a team player, and there's competition within divisions and things like that. But ultimately, you're all able to come together and make a decision that's best for your company, your organization. If you don't, you get fired. I mean, that's just the way it goes. In the legislature, it doesn't work that way. And I realized how critical it is of the leaders that we have. And I noticed that during the session that the leader of the House and the leader of the Senate and the governor really didn't come together. And I'm not blaming it on any one person. Certainly, the governor came out early with his plan. He came out in November and said, these are my priorities. He never changed once. But both the Senate had one priority and the House had another priority. And so what happened as we went through the session, those priorities of the triangle never changed. And I kept asking in committees, you know, we have a committee system in the House and the Senate. And the committees are chosen by the leaders of the House, the leader of the House, and what committees you're on. I served on education, finance, education policy, transportation, and technology. We spent the first 3 months talking about anything except the budget. And often I would say in the meetings, not just myself, but others, on both sides of the aisle, would say, well, when are we going to talk about how much is this going to cost? And well, we're not going to think about that right now. And I was really amazed that we spent so much time at the beginning of that session. We are in the middle of the worst recession in 60 years in this state and in this country. And I thought we were going to go and work on the budget, and I was ready to roll up my sleeves. No, we talked about everything except how much it's going to cost and how we're going to pay for it. And it was interesting to me that we didn't do that. Well, then when we started to talk about it was after the March forecast, and we had all the numbers in the beginning of April, and it was really